"Officer, please open this trash bin. My mom is still inside." The trembling, hoarse voice of a young boy echoed through a narrow alley in the Fresh Market. It was a calm afternoon until that desperate cry shattered the silence. A wealthy man passing by had to stop his car when he heard the boy's painful sobs. "My mom is in the trash." The boy was thin and weak-looking. No one believed him. People laughed, thinking he was just making up stories for attention. But when someone finally opened the trash bin with hesitation, the shocking truth inside nearly stopped their hearts. Welcome back to a quiet little corner of storytelling. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to support more stories like this. Around them, life went on as usual. Crowds passing by, vendors shouting to sell their goods, carts rolling noisily. No one stopped. A fish vendor frowned and shook her head. Kids these days just make things up for attention. A motorcycle taxi driver sighed, pulling up his face covering. Poor kid, maybe his mother abandoned him and he misses her so much he's imagining things. Only the little boy remained, clutching a worn, torn teddy bear. His eyes were bloodshot as he knelt in front of a rusty metal trash bin placed at the corner of the market. His frail body trembled intermittently. His small hands kept pounding on the cold steel lid without stopping. His sobs slowly faded into the noise of an uncaring crowd. No one paid attention, everyone acting indifferent. At that moment, a sleek black Mercedes pulled over to the roadside. The door opened and a man stepped out, a teat, a 35-year-old dressed in a sharp black suit and polished leather shoes. He carried the cold, composed presence of a successful businessman. Originally, Atit had only stopped by the market to find a cafe where he was supposed to meet a business partner. His mind had been filled with numbers and contracts. But the boy's piercing cries stopped him in his tracks. He paused and looked toward the corner of the market. What he saw made him frown slightly. A dirty little boy, dressed in torn clothes, his hair matted with dust and tears, was crying and begging desperately. My mom is still in there." The boy, Bass, sobbed as he pointed a trembling finger at the trash bin. The people around them shook their heads. Some even laughed quietly. This kid must have watched too many movies. For heaven's sake, it's a trash bin. There's nothing but garbage inside. Who would be in there? Atit stood still for a moment. In his mind, reason tried to brush it off as nonsense. He told himself this had nothing to do with him. He was used to seeing people trying to gain attention or using pity as a tool. But just as he was about to walk away, Boss ran up and grabbed onto the hem of his expensive suit. "Please, sir, please believe me. No one is willing to help. My mom is going to die." The boy's small, dust-covered hands clutched tightly onto the smooth fabric, leaving stains behind. His eyes were filled with desperation, as if he were holding on to the very last shred of hope. For a brief moment, Athit hesitated, but then his face turned cold again. He pulled the boy's hands away and said firmly, "Go find your relatives, don't bother me." He turned and walked off, leaving the boy kneeling on the damp concrete ground. The crowd whispered among themselves, "See, no one believes him. Kids these days just make things up." The sound of Athit's shoes echoed against the pavement as he walked into a luxurious cafe across the street, but once he sat down, his hands trembled slightly. A cup of coffee was placed in front of him, steam rising gently, yet he couldn't bring himself to take even a single sip. The only sound echoing in his head was the boy's sobbing voice. "My mom is still in there. Please." He tried to shake the thought away. Logic told him it was just a lie, but deep inside, a distant memory began to resurface. When he was 8 years old, he too had once cried in the middle of a crowd, begging people to help his dying father. But no one believed him. No one stopped. Now the eyes of that little boy seemed to reflect the painful past he had buried for so many years. Outside the window, the frail child was still there, hugging his teddy bear curled up beside the trash bin, unnoticed by the busy evening market that carried on as usual. Atit gripped his coffee cup tightly, his heart filled with unease. He sat inside the luxurious cafe, warm yellow lights reflecting softly off fine ceramic cups. A waiter bowed politely and placed a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him, but instead of its usual rich aroma, all he could sense was the echo piercing through his mind. "My mom is still in there, please." Every time he blinked, the image of the boy appeared again, small hands gripping his suit tightly, tears streaming down a dust-covered face, the sound of relentless sobbing echoing in his mind. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't push the image away. Outside, the market was beginning to thin out. The last light of the day cast a glow over the old tin rooftops. The boy was still sitting in the same spot, enduring in silent despair. No one paid attention. The adults, accustomed to indifference, all believed it was just a child's imagination. Atit leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. He had been through something like this before, a memory he had tried to bury as deeply as possible. That day, his father had collapsed in the middle of the village road. 8-year-old Atit had run everywhere, crying and begging for help, but people only stood at a distance, whispering that his father was probably drunk. No one stepped forward. His father died, and the innocent plea for help in his young eyes was ignored by everyone in the village. It was a wound he had never wanted to remember again. But today, Boss's eyes felt like a blade, piercing straight into that buried pain. The pain stabbed into his heart, reopening a wound he thought had long healed. He clenched his teeth and tried stirring his coffee. The clinking sound of the spoon against the cup echoed sharply in the silence. But when he lifted it to take a sip, the bitterness caught in his throat. He couldn't swallow. Outside, Boss was still sitting on the ground. His head rested against his torn teddy bear, his small shoulders trembling under the dim light. Sometimes he looked up toward the cafe window where Atit sat, his eyes filled with despair, yet still holding a faint glimmer of hope. That look seemed to say, "You're the last person. Please don't leave me." Atit flinched slightly. His heart began to race, and sweat formed on his palms. He turned his face away, trying to avoid that gaze. But inside, his emotions churned uncontrollably, a deep unease he couldn't explain. Inside the cafe, some customers chatted casually, laughter mixing with the sound of clinking glasses. For them, it was just another ordinary afternoon. But for Atit, time seemed to stand still. Everything around him lost meaning, except for the image of the lonely boy outside. He kept telling himself, "This has nothing to do with me. It's his family's problem. Let the authorities handle it." Yet his mind and his heart were in fierce conflict. A part of him wanted to ignore it, to hold on to the cold detachment that had become his habit. But another part of him kept whispering relentlessly, "If you turn your back today, that child may never get another chance, and you will be haunted for the rest of your life." Atit raised a hand to his temple. His racing heartbeat made it hard to breathe. He had never felt so conflicted, so trapped in a situation like this before. The last light of the day faded, and darkness slowly covered the street. Yellow streetlights cast a dull glow, illuminating the dirty face of the little boy, yet he still sat there, enduring, as if his heart was about to break. The sound of late-season cicadas filled the air. The night breeze carried the damp, sour smell of garbage. The street gradually fell silent, leaving only the soft sobs of a child abandoned in the midst of people's indifference. Atit clenched his fists tightly. The feeling of helplessness from his past came rushing back, clearer than ever. But this time, he had a choice, and that choice could change someone's fate. He suddenly stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the tiled floor, making a sharp noise that caused some customers to turn and look. Atit didn't care. He strode quickly out of the cafe, crossing the brick-paved street straight toward where the boy was sitting. Bass looked up, his tear-filled eyes suddenly lighting up the moment he saw Atit return. The boy's body trembled as he clutched his teddy bear tightly. His voice was hoarse, but he managed to speak. "Sir, you came back." Atit crouched down. For the first time, he faced the boy's eyes up close. He took a deep breath, then placed his large hand gently on the boy's thin shoulder. "Tell me, your mom is really in there, isn't she?" Bass's eyes shone as he nodded eagerly. "I heard her knocking. I'm not lying. Please believe me." In that moment, Athit's heart tightened. Logic still whispered that it was impossible, but his humanity was beginning to outweigh his doubt. He looked around. The curious crowd had mostly dispersed, leaving behind only a few lingering, watchful eyes. Athit pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. His voice was firm as he spoke. "Sergeant, it's me. Send someone to the alley. Talat Plop Plaw Fresh Market Alley, right now. I need you to open a trash bin immediately." On the other end, Sergeant Kong's voice sounded confused. "A trash bin, sir? Are you joking?" "I never joke," Athit replied through clenched teeth. "Just come." He hung up and looked at the boy who was still clinging close to him. In that moment, he knew his life was about to take an unexpected turn. The sound of police sirens soon shattered the silence of the market alley. Red and blue lights flashed against the old walls, reflecting on the damp brick ground. Residents began to gather, whispering and pointing with curiosity, as if a dramatic scene was unfolding right before them. Athit stood beside Boss, gently placing a hand on the child's shoulder to comfort him. Though the small body trembled from the cold, his eyes still shone with hope, never leaving that old trash bin. The man who stepped out of the police car was Sergeant Kong, a strongly built officer. The man who stepped out of the police car wore a long-sleeved police uniform, faded with age but still neatly pressed. His expression showed clear irritation at being called out so late in the evening. He frowned, looked around, and then walked toward Athit. "Mr. Athit, all this just for a single trash bin? You had me bring the whole team for this?" Sergeant Kong's voice carried a hint of dissatisfaction. Athit didn't respond. He simply nodded toward the boy. Bass stepped forward hesitantly, his voice hoarse. "Officer, my mom is in there. Please, open it." The sergeant looked the boy up and down, his eyes filled with doubt, mixed with a trace of sympathy. He sighed, then turned back to Athit. "Maybe the child is just scared. You know how kids are sometimes. They imagine things." Before he could finish, Bass shouted through his tears, "I'm not lying. I heard my mom knocking from inside. Really." His cry fell into sudden silence. The crowd froze. People began whispering among themselves. "Is it true? That's terrifying." Athit's cold gaze cut through the murmurs. He spoke clearly and firmly to the sergeant. "Open it, now. There's no other option." With no choice left, Sergeant Kong signaled to two of his officers. They stepped forward, gripping metal rods as they approached the old trash bin. The sound of metal clashing rang out sharply in the tense silence.